my name is Karan Kumar, and I have been training IELTS for more than 10 years now, and I've helped thousands of students to clear this exam. Today's webinar is going to be about IELTS prep altogether. IELTS exam essentially is an English proficiency exam. It basically tests your skills with respect to listening, reading, writing, and speaking. This is an exam an individual needs to give if he or she wishes to go abroad to either study, work, or migrate to those specific countries where English is the native language. IELTS predominantly are of two kinds. First one is academic and the other one is general training. Academic essentially measures your skills with respect to English language, whether it is suitable or is it enough so that you could survive easily in the university, in the academic environment altogether. Whereas IELTS general training exam tests your skills with respect to work environment or in general. So if I were to give an example, if you go to work in an organization, you may have to know how to write a letter, and that is one skill where it is tested in general training in particular. But today's focus is going to be majorly about IELTS academic tests. So without much ado, let's get on to it. IELTS academic exam tests on 4 skills, that is listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Each of these skills predominantly depends on how well are you able to either process the information or how well are you able to convey the same. The next thing is about, let's proceed further with in detail about what IELTS listening is all about. So if I were to give you information with respect to IELTS listening, there are in total 40 questions. And these 40 questions are divided into 4 sections, each section having about 10 questions. So you see your entire listening test goes for about 30 minutes. And in the end, you're given 10 minutes of additional time to transfer the answers on the actual answer sheet. Now, I would like to bring forth an important information. There was a time when IELTS was predominantly conducted in written-based way or method. But these days, IELTS exams are also delivered via computer. Although you do not have the privilege of taking the exam from home, you can go to the exam center and in front of a computer, you can give this exam. These exams are generally conducted in the prometric centers. Specifically, I'm talking about computer-based tests. Whereas these paper-based tests are delivered across the country, and these are generally in the 3-star or 5-star hotels, or sometimes also in large banquet halls of hotels. Right, so coming back to the IELTS listening module, if I were to give you an information about what IELTS listening is when it comes to paper-based tests and what IELTS listening test is when it comes to computer-based tests. So IELTS listening and paper-based test, one major difference is you get additional 10 minutes time to transfer these answers to the actual answer sheet. Whereas computer-delivered test, you have to give the exam, you have to give the answers then and there. You're not given any additional time in the end. So you've got to be careful when you're doing a computer delivered test. Now, each of these questions that they're asked, they are divided, as I said, they're divided into 4 sections, each section having about 10 questions. So if you see, first section has 10 questions. Generally, whether it is computer delivered test or paper-based test, this audio primarily contains a general conversation between 2 different kind of people, and the type of questions that you can expect from this conversation is going to be majorly form filling, where you're given a question in the form of name and dash. If you have a question related to age, dash, so you just have to write it down. So in the audio, you would be listening to the audio, the content specifically with respect to the same questions. Now, good thing about the questions is the questions always come in the same order as the questions, as the audio flows. So first section is majorly about the conversation between two people, and it's on a general topic. It could be something like an individual getting into a car showroom and asking about different variants of cars, and the person, the salesman, gives the information about different type of cars available for the budget that the buyer asks. So in the questionnaire, you would see that, what's the buyer's name? What variant of car does the buyer ask? So sort of things. So these are the type of questions that you can expect. And these questions would be either in the form of form filling, or it could be sometimes MCQs, which is nothing but multiple choice questions. The second section also again has 10 questions. This module is a monologue, like only one person speaking exactly the same way as I am doing right now. There is no two-way communication. It is just one person giving information. So it is generally a tourist guide. A tourist guide giving information about a city, a place, a historical monument, or could be anything as such. So mostly the kind of questions that you can expect is in the form of a map. All you have to do is understand the audio that the speaker is giving information about, follow through the questions and answer them accordingly. You could also get sometimes fill in the blanks and MCQs, but predominantly the type of questions that you can expect is in the form of a map. The third section again has 10 questions, but this time the audio again contains a conversation between 2 or 3 people, but in an academic setting. So what exactly happens is either like 2 students are discussing among each other, or it could be something like 2 students and 1 professor giving information or discussing about a project or a research topic and things of that sort. Or it could be something like 2 professors asking questions to a single student. So it's essentially a conversation between 2 different people, or 2 or 3 people maximum. The kind of questions come here in the third section is multiple choice questions. And this is a little tricky part than compared to all the other sections, because while you're doing the test, you may feel that all the options were discussed and you may be confused between which one to pick it up. So have patience. I'm going to talk about it. How do you deal with the type of question in the next slide? But lastly, in the fourth section, again, you have 10 questions, but it is again a monologue. Only one person giving information. This information is on an academic topic. It could be something like a professor giving a lecture on a particular topic. It could be scientific, it could be historic, it could be as simple as a hat making process, like an individual giving information like step by step how to make a hat. So predominantly the type of questions that you can expect here is either fill in the blanks or MCQs. Now, imagine you have MCQs or fill in the blanks. You've got to be careful of the kind of questions. One thing is for sure, that the way the audio comes, it's going to be in the same order that your questions would be. So you don't have to worry what if the last question is discussed in the beginning, or the second question is discussed later in the end, or something as such. So nothing as such is going to happen. Most of the times you will see that the questions come in the same order as the audio flows. Moving further, there are a few things that you need to be careful about while you're doing your listening module. So these are like key takeaway things that you must remember when you're trying to do this test in particular. The first common mistake that an individual does is with the spellings. So imagine the answer that you find according to the conversation is symphony, and instead of writing SYMPHONY, you've written SYMFONY. Although it sounds the same, of course, it will be marked wrong because you gave a wrong spelling while typing in the answer or while writing down the answer. You've got to be careful on that factor. The next element is singular or plural. This is a very simple, but sometimes can get very tricky. So imagine while listening to the audio, you figure out that the answer is something like presence. You found out the answer is supposed to be present, and while writing down the answer or while typing down the answer, you accidentally ended up writing present, P-R-E-S-E-N-T, and not P-R-E-S-E-N-T-S. Then your answer will be marked wrong. So always remember when you're doing specifically fill in the blanks type of question where you go wrong here. So you've got to be careful of whether the answer that you listen to is singular or plural. Remember, you've got to pay more attention to it. The next thing is, are these answers associated with any of the articles? You've got to remember, if these answers are associated with the articles, and if the question demands one, you've got to use them. If the question does not demand one, you should try and avoid it. Do not try and use the words if it is not necessary. Another key thing that you should remember is, when you're doing these fill in the blank questions, always remember to read these instructions. In the instructions, they'll be very clearly given that you should not write your answers more than 1 word or 2 words or 3 words. So be careful of based on the questions and the instructions that are given, you've got to write the answer accordingly. Now, another important thing while you're doing fill in the blanks in particular. So sometimes the answers that you find out as per the audio would be something like currency. Now imagine in the question it was asked that at what price did John purchase his jacket? And you figure out the answer to be as 125 pounds. You should remember that these pounds or any of the currency that you use are always prefix and never suffix. Although they announce or they pronounce it as 125 pounds, you're not supposed to write 125 and then P-O-U-N-D-S. Instead, you should know how to write the currency symbol, that is pounds, and write it accordingly. Next, instructions for MCQs. It's really important that you go through the instructions carefully. Even if you have practiced hundreds of times during the exam, you've got to make sure that you read through the instructions. Now imagine if you did not look at the instructions and you took the type of question for granted and you ended up typing the answer or writing down the answer. But for the particular type of questions like maths, you were expected to write A, B, C, D. Instead of that, you ended up writing the words itself. And this could cost you a lot, and the entire section may go for a toss. And that's why you've got to be careful. And that is why I say that you should look through the instructions before you attempt the questions. Now, another takeaway thing, this is really important, all right? You need to understand this. When you're doing your listening test, you've got to be careful of the shifts in the conversation. Suppose the speaker speaks about that I was going to the market before I attended a meeting. No, sorry. I went to the market after attending the meeting. So you've got to be careful of these shifts. So accordingly, you'll have to pick up the answer and not the ones that comes before. So suppose the question was like, if the speaker attended or visited the market after the meeting or before the meeting, and if you have understood the entire conversation, you should realize that it is after the meeting and not before the meeting, because he did shift his conversation from before to after. So you've got to be careful of the words like sorry, however, then, and now. So according to the question, you've got to pick up the answer. And very important thing, most of the right answers that they speak, when the speaker is about to give the right answer, you need to realize that they stress upon it a lot, and only then they give the answer, otherwise they do not. And most important thing, remember, your entire listening test is about listening. If you're not paying attention to what the speakers are speaking and you are extremely concerned about the questions, you'll never get your answers right. Understand the very essence of the entire test. It is testing whether your listening skills are at par with the people who reside in those respective countries. Or this could happen even in our general day-to-day communicative languages. Like if I were to talk about Hindi or Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, or any language that we speak of, if you do not have the required listening skills, then you may not understand the entire thing that the speaker speaks about, and you may miss the whole point. So remember, it is all about listening. So pay more attention towards the listening, the audio, than struggling with writing down the answers and looking at the questions and being like profusely concerned about the options and the answers. So you've got to remember, if I were to quantify it, let's say if your attention towards listening, reading, and writing down the answer, for listening, it should be about 70%, and reading and writing down the answer collectively should be barely 30%. So I hope you understand the fact that how important it is for you to shift your complete attention towards listening than to the reading and writing. Let me tell you something important. While you're doing your listening test, good thing about it is the examiner, or I mean the speaker, gives you about 30 to 45 seconds time before they start the audio to look through the questions. So when they give you 30 to 45 seconds time, that is exactly when you look through the questions. You got to understand what you have to anticipate as an answer, and based on that, you've got to listen to the entire conversations carefully and pick up the answer and write it down accordingly. Do not pick up the answer in haste. You never know that he might have said something in the beginning and then he shifts his entire conversation to something else, and then eventually says that this is exactly what I did, or this is exactly what I intended, and so on and so forth. So have patience while you're doing your listening test. You've got to understand it's extremely important that the entire test is testing your listening skills and not something that are you able to write down the answers, or are you able to get the answers right. It's just not about that, but it is majorly about whether you are able to understand what the speaker is speaking and accordingly pick up the answer based on the questions that's been asked. So that's exactly what IELTS listening module is all about. Let's move further. IELTS reading. So IELTS reading module lasts for overall about 60 minutes, whether it is computer delivered or paper delivered test, it's the same. So you again get 40 questions, but this time the 40 questions are divided into 3 sections. Each section has about 12 to 14 questions. So technically, while you're answering these questions, you get 20 minutes to solve each of the section. Now, when you're doing computer delivered tests, typically you have a countdown timer on the screen, so you realize that how much time are you consuming in reading the context and whether you're able to pick up the answers or no. While you're taking a paper-based test, you will see that the invigilators in the exam center would give you enough input with respect to how much time is left. So you should consciously realize that your time is ticking away, and you've got to be careful about how much time do you consume to read the passage and answer the questions. So typically these passages, so each section has one long passage. Now this long passage may have anything between 1200 to 2500 words. So you may end up taking a lot of time to read through the passage and then try and figure out the answers. Remember, if you do not read these passages, you will be extremely concerned about reading the questions and picking up the answer. Again, just like listening module, remember this test is testing your reading comprehension skills. So whether you're able to read the passage and then pick up the answer. Imagine you read the passage, you understood the entire context word by word, and then if you see the question, magically you will see that you would know the answer because your heart would say so, and you could validate it with the text that has been given. That's the beauty of this. Now, what are the kind of questions that you could expect in IELTS reading? The first kind and the most often kind is multiple choice questions. You may also expect short answer questions, wherein they'll give you a question and you're supposed to write either 1 word, 2 words, or maximum 3 words as an answer. But before that happens, they would also give you very clear instruction with respect to how many words can you write at max. Even if they have not mentioned it clearly, remember that you cannot write any words, any answer more than 3 words. Remember, whether it is listening module or reading module, none of your answers could be more than 3 words. That's it. The third type of the question that you can expect is suitable title-based questions. So what exactly do you expect in this? So there are various paragraphs of the passage labeled it with letters A, B, C, D, E, F, and there are possible questions or possible options given to you depending on the number of passages. So let's say if you had 5 paragraphs in that passage, they will give you about 7 to 8 options, and they'll ask you to pick up which is the most suitable title for each paragraph. So you've got to read the entire paragraph word by word, understand what the author is conveying his message as, and try and pick up the answer. So the kind of strategy that you should deal with whenever you get multiple choice questions or suitable title based question is process of elimination. You've got to eliminate incorrect answers instead of trying to figure out the right answer. The next type of question that you get is about true, false, not given, or yes, no, not given. You know, back in the time when we were all in school, we used to get questions like true or false. So it was very easy for us to understand either the answer is true or false. It was like straightforward. If the question statement does not agree with the passage information, then it is very clear that you would write false. Sorry, you would write true. And if the question statement disagrees, or if it was never discussed in the passage, then you would straightforward write false. Now, in this case, in IELTS test, you also have a dark horse called as not given, where most of the students get confused with how to deal with false or not given type of questions. We will look at it later if it is needed, but for now, you should know that this is one of the tricky type of a question. You got to pay more attention when you're dealing with this question. You should also accept the fact that you may end up consuming more time while answering these type of questions than any other type. The next type is match the paragraph. So what happens in this is you would have read the entire passage, and there would be some random statements given to you, list of random statements, and while you read those statements, you've got to match which statement belongs to which paragraph. So accordingly, you'll have to again read the instructions carefully to understand what you're expected and do it accordingly. Last but not the least, the type of question that you can expect is fill in the blanks, which is again very common in listening as well as reading. It's pretty simple. Again, there will be instructions given to you how many words that you could write for each question. And accordingly, you've got to pick up the answers. If in the instructions they've given that no more than 1 word, make sure that you give only 1 word as an answer. But if the instruction says that you cannot write more than 2 words, it does not mean that for every question you've got to pick up 2 words. It says no more than 2 words. So that means your answer could be 1 word or also 2 words. So be careful with that. Again, what are the things that you've got to be careful with while doing reading module? Again, just like listening, you've got to be careful of spellings. Now, I understand that the entire passage is right in front of you. There's a very little chance that you would make mistakes, at least when it comes to the spellings while doing your reading module. But sometimes, due to our negligence, we end up writing something. Although we have seen the very word in the passage, we end up writing an incorrect word. So you got to be careful of the spellings. Next, instructions. As I already told you, and you must have understood how important it is to read the instructions carefully before you attempt the type of questions that you're doing. If you have understood the instructions well, guess what? Half the way you've understood what are you supposed to do with respect to the questions, and that is when you know what you have to pick up as an answer. If you fail to understand what you're supposed to do with the following set of questions, then there is a thick possibility that you would end up doing things that you should not be. Right. Next, again, as I said, number of words, you've got to be careful. So this would be mentioned in the instructions. So that's about it. Right, MCQs. So multiple choice questions, you could get sometimes that there could be more than 1 right answer for the question. So you've got to read the instructions, also the question, to understand how many right answers could be in the multiple choice question that you're attempting. Most of the times it is single answer, but sometimes to trick you down, they'll change the words. And therefore, as I said, you've got to read the instructions and also the questions carefully so that you get your answers right. Now, this is one very important thing. While you're doing your reading module, you should remember that always you have to comprehend the data or the information given in the passage from the author's point of view. Never should you ever have your own understanding or your own inferences about the topic. Now, sometimes what happens is you get a topic, something that you're very familiar with. So then what happens? Your conscious mind already starts processing the information that was stored somewhere in your brain and constantly compare with the information given in the passage. So there could be conflict of understanding and your overall comprehension could go for a toss. So would strictly suggest you to, regardless of the type of topic that you get, that you've got to comprehend from the author's point of view, right? Next, read the passage before and then read questions. Not necessarily, although, but because I think there are some students who think that, reading the questions before, they get to know that what they have to look for, and then read the passage. Reading the passage makes a lot more sense for them. But imagine the very essence of this test is to check if your comprehension skills are at par to the level of the students who reside in the country that you're willing to go to. So if your comprehending skills are not at par, then you will obviously pick up wrong answers. So all I'm trying to say here is first read the passage. And when you read the passage, read with the objective of understanding, not just for the sake of answering the question. I've seen enough students often telling me about that, they've got to, all they care about is answering the questions. But imagine if you just care about that, then you do not understand the context of what the author is conveying. But imagine if you've read the entire passage word by word, you've understood it as a story, and then you will see that the questions that are asked, magically you would know at least what is where. If you do not know thoroughly what the answer is as it is, but then you would know for sure that where can you look or where can you find the right answer. Never leave any question unanswered, whether it is listening or reading module. Remember, never leave any questions unanswered because there are no negative scoring. So remember that there's nothing to lose. So mark something and move forward instead of leaving a question unanswered. Last, remember that it is a reading comprehension test. So what happens is when you read the questions first and then look at the passages, then all you care about is just the questions and you have to get the answer hook or crook. You do not understand what the author is conveying in the passage. So you do not enjoy the process. What I would rather say is enjoy the process of reading and then pick up the answer accordingly. Let's move further to the third module of your test, that is IELTS Writing. IELTS Writing module has 2 tasks, and overall timing that is given to you is 60 minutes. Whether it is a computer delivered test or paper-based test, you have the same 2 tasks, task 1 and task 2. And again, instead of writing it on a piece of paper, while doing a computer delivered test, you've got to type. So your typing speed and your accuracy with knowing the letters, what is where, should be good enough, and then go for computer delivered test. If not, choose paper-based test. And some students claim that their handwriting is not good. And if that is the case, I would strictly recommend you to take up computer delivered test, because if you have written a masterpiece, whether it is an essay or a report, but the examiner fails to understand what you have written, then everything falls apart. Therefore, I would recommend that, understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and accordingly choose the kind of a test that you would want to give, whether it is computer delivered or paper delivered test. Anyway, so task 1 is report writing. which wherein you're given only 20 minutes to answer the question, and you've got to make sure that you write about 150 to 170 words. The kind of questions that you can expect here is either infographics, life cycle, or images. So infographics, you may have a pie chart, bar graph, line graph, a table, or a combination of any of these things. The next one is life cycle of an insect, bird, or food chain, or it could be also a process of manufacturing a product. So they will give you in the form of a graphical representation. All you've got to do is understand the information that is given in the form of a graphical representation and put it in the words. And you've got to make sure that you write it in the form of a report, not in the form of a story. The third type of a question that you can expect is images. So when I say images, it is mostly maps. You cannot expect anything else. So it could be something like before and after, sort of a thing, generally in the form of given as a map. So before developing the tourist facility in an island, how the island looked like, and after developing the tourist facilities, how the island actually looked like. So they would give you before and after. All you have to do is understand, analyze the question, and draft a report accordingly. The next task is task 2, essay writing. Here, you've got to finish this task within 40 minutes. There's no hard and fast rule that you have to finish your task 1 within 20 minutes and task 2 within 40 minutes. If you're taking paper-based tests, you could also do 45 and 15 or 25 and 35. It is up to you. But it is generally recommended that for essay writing, you should not spend more than 40 minutes because you've got to write about 250 to 270 words. Whereas in report writing, you've got to maintain 150 to 170 words. Now, the kind of questions that you can expect in an essay could be opinion based, wherein they ask you a question like, smoking should be banned in a country. Do you agree or disagree to it? Or to what extent do you agree? Or discuss both the views and then give your opinion. So these are the kind of questions that you can expect under opinion based. Any one of it is what you get. And by the way, let me tell you, in the IELTS writing module, you do not get any options. Suppose you do not know anything about the topic, you cannot ask to change the topic or something as such. You've got to write on the topic whichsoever it is given. You could also expect problem or solution based questions or cause and effect type of a question. Like for example, these days neighbors do not have good relationship with each other as they did in the past. Why do you think the reasons are, and what can be done to improve this whole situation? So they've mixed up the cause and effect and also problem solution. So you are expected to write the causes, why it happens, and also offer solutions, what can be done to curb the same. So you've got to understand the nature of the question, and based on the topic, you've got to draft your essay. Now, what are the things that you should remember while doing your writing tasks? First and foremost is, after you have drafted, whether it is a report or essay, ask yourself, have you answered the questions completely? So the moment you look at the question, your heart says that so and so things, and then what actually happens while you start writing to draft is you start with something and you end up with something else completely. So you've got to be careful that you've got to stay on track or on the course so that you could get maximum benefit out of it. The next element is Lexis. It's really important that you should use the right kind of vocabulary. Look, do not try and impress the examiner by using some extraordinary or fancy or flamboyant words just to impress them. What happens is when you use fancy and flamboyant words, you end up using it incorrectly, and you've got to be careful about it, that you're not using it in a way where you're not sure if that makes sense in the context, right? So you've got to be careful there. Next is the flow. Really important. So it happens to best of us. When we start with the topic, we start with something in our minds, and then our thoughts keep generating, and then if you go on, you would realize in the end when you recheck your work that you started with something and you ended with something else. So if we see at the hindsight, the entire essay or the report, it looks all over the map. You've got to be careful of whether your essay is coherently framed. So there must be a proper flow. Like first, this is exactly what happened, and then you moved on to this, and then this, and then this. So there must be logical relation between the paragraphs and the overall idea as such that you write. Last is the grammar. You should know what type of sentences have you used. Let me give you one key tip that you may thank me later. IELTS examiners expect you to use as many active voice sentences than passive voice. Look, we as Indians have predominant, habit of using passive voice over active voice. So you've got to be a little conscious when you're writing your essay. This could be $1 million tip, and you've got to remember this. You have to draft your entire essay in active voice and not passive voice at all. Also, your sentences should follow the grammatical rules, whether you use a complex sentence, a compound sentence, or a simple sentence. You should use variety of sentences to also prove that you are grammatically aware of the rules, and then you know how to use them appropriately. You also got to be careful about the punctuation marks that you use. I understand for the fact that most of the times we either use a full stop or a comma, but if you could use variety of punctuation marks in the right context, you get bonus marks for it. Also remember, it is testing your language ability and not intelligence. So do not be bogged down by the fact that your ideas are not groundbreaking. Even if you have silly or simple topic, remember that it's not about what you write, it's about how you convey your message and not just what your ideas are. Of course, if your ideas are groundbreaking, then your overall essay stands out and you may have chances to score 8.5 or 9. But then if your ideas are not great, even if they are simple, it is fine if you've used and followed all these things, and you can expect really great marks. The last module of the IELTS test is IELTS speaking. This IELTS speaking is in 3 parts. Maximum time that you will be spending with the examiner will be 14 minutes, and the minimum time is 11 minutes. Unlike the other 3 modules, speaking is going to be one-on-one. Whether you book a computer delivered test or a paper delivered test, IELTS speaking is going to be one-on-one. Like in a closed room, you and the examiner would be sitting to each other, and your entire speaking will be audio recorded. The next thing is, so there are 3 parts. The part 1 is about introductory, part 2 is speaking on a topic, and part 3 is extended topic. So introductory topic lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes, speaking on a topic lasts for 3 to 4 minutes, and third part is 4 to 5 minutes again. Remember, when you're giving a speech, you're also given 1 minute's time to prepare, and then you'll have to speak about it accordingly. Now, what are the key takeaway things that you should know about while you're doing your speaking test? You've got to be careful about never give one-word answers to whatsoever questions that they ask. The shorter the answers you give, the more the questions you get. And when the examiner who listens to your entire audio, because it is not the examiner who's sitting right in front of you who's going to give you the scores, but it is some third person who's going to give you the scores. So when he's listening to your entire audio, he feels that you're not confident or you do not know how to speak, and that is why you're giving shorter answers. But that doesn't mean that you go on and on and on to speak on. So just remember, you strike a right balance while giving an answer. But you should remember that never give one word or one sentence answer for sure. Second important thing, avoid repeating the same words from the question. So if there's a question like, what did you eat last night? So if you say, what I ate last night is, it's a very bad technique to buy some extra time to answer the question. It's okay if you take a couple of seconds time before you answer, but then do not repeat the words from the question as it is. The third thing is follow the same tense of the questions. So if the question was asked in present simple tense, you've got to make sure that you answer in the same tense. So let's say if the examiner asks you a question like, what are your hobbies? Do not just say that when I was a kid, I used to do this and that and this and that, because here you're meddling with the tense. The question is about what are your hobbies. So talk about now. Even if you wish to talk about something in the past, but at least you start your answer with present. You could uh, move to the past or move to the future tense, provided you have smooth transition of thoughts by using right kind of words. Next, avoid fillers and unnecessary pauses. I see that a lot of Indians, I mean, even native speakers have this. They use a lot of fillers and unnecessary pauses in between. So either the reason could be like they are trying to buy some extra time before they could give some answer, or it could be something like they are just habituated to it. They cannot avoid repeating the same words over and over again. So you've got to be careful. You should avoid them. The next, use vocabulary, idioms, and phrases that fit into the context. You must know that using good vocabulary, adjectives, idioms, and phrases, all these things can boost your scores, but just using them for the sake of using, you would lose marks. You've got to be careful that you use them in an appropriate context so that you get maximum marks out of it. Understand the question before answering it. You've got to know that if the question is about you or it is about in general. So let's say if there's a question like, what do you think an individual should do when they get into trouble? Or this is here in this context, the examiner is asking your opinion. So you make sure that you give an answer with respect to your view, not in general. If the question is something like, in general, what should people do when they are in trouble? So here you could give your idea as well, but since the question is in general, see to it that you answer it in general, like what is the general opinion and not your opinion. Again, in the end, you should know that it is testing your ability to convey your message in English, not to see whether you have a foreign accent like American or British. All right, I must tell this. You should uh, just be yourself. You need not have any particular accent to score higher marks. You can just be yourself. You don't have to follow American or British. If you naturally have it, it's great. But if you do not have it, you've got to make sure that you stick to your general accent. So that's pretty much about the entire test. And I'm open to the questions if you have any.